Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to SM Advanced Forum. I am Don Robinson, as you probably know. And we are here for our regular monthly roundup of gossip, chat and opinion on topics of the day across the streaming technology sector. Apologies for absence are coming in from two of our regular hosts. Mark has got to bed at about the time we were due to be setting up for this event, having been doing more live events as always. But fortunately, one of our guests is an expert on live events, so you won't miss out on Mark's contribution this week. And poor old Eric's had to toddle off to the doctor for a medical thing. So we won't go into any of that detail because it's probably uncomfortable, embarrassing, or something awkward like that. Anyway, we do have one of our co-hosts with us. Tim, how are you? Are you back in the living?
I'm doing well. I went to the doctor the day after I got back from Streaming Forum and Mobile World Congress, so I'm keeping myself sort of quarantined. If I cough, I apologize, but other than that, I'm doing quite well. Thanks.
Perfect. And well, I had the pleasure of having you stay with me for a few days while we since the last SM Advanced Forum. I should start calling it SMAF, since the last SMAF episode. And we went to Streaming Forum. Did you enjoy the event? I thought it was a good
evening. Absolutely. Well, I both enjoyed the weather and the fact that last year when we were at Streaming Forum, it snowed and caused chaos. This year it was roughly 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But even above and beyond that, just some of the things like the DAZN keynote at the beginning was actually really interesting, how Florian sort of broke down the market. And in fact, when I left London and went down to Mobile World Congress, the very first day that I was there, I saw an ad for DAZN on the back of one of the buses in Barcelona. It turned out that was the day they actually launched in Spain. So right. It seems like they've got an interesting model, and that model seems to be driving them forward across at least parts of the continent like that.
They are super busy at the moment, those boys. It's the DAZN team. I thought the Streaming Forum was excellent. I thought it really had all three conferences in the last 12 months have just had a new energy to them, which has been just really, really delightful, I think. Would you share that?
Oh, I agree. And was it Deepak Cuddy from Sky who actually talked about sort of the marketing models and how to do engagement across multiple platforms when there's fragmentation? That was good, as well as, of course, the topics that you covered and I covered. Is OTT better than broadcast? Which, by the way, since we're here and since we don't have Eric to fill time and Mark to fill time, let's talk about really quickly before we go to the guests your definition of OTT, because you positively have a number of people at the show, and I know we sort of went through that model, but I think it's good for our audience to understand sort of how OTT is such a common generic thing that it almost can be used for anything, but how we need to make sure that we're sort of bringing it back to define precisely.
Well, it does. I mean, as writers, one tends to become a bit pedantic about words and how they're used and so on. My pet hate at the moment is OTT. OTT does mean something very specific, and it was very strange. There were many panel sessions and discussions at the conference where people were saying, what does OTT mean? And people were blundering around trying to define it and trying to come up with a sort of mutually agreed definition of it. And none of the examples given rang true with what I believe the term came into use for. So basically, back in the days of AOL running its ISP and trying to deliver on-net services, where we would have in the late 90s, early 2000s talked about
for our audience who may not know what AOL is, do you want to describe what that is first, real quick?
Well, AOL used to be an ISP, wasn't it? It was original American Online, and so within the ISP's wall, the walled garden, content was delivered locally within their autonomous system, within their network. Therefore, they had quads control and so on. And as video began to be delivered inside the wall, that started to be known as IPTV, because the network could quality control everything from core to edge, because they essentially controlled the edge routers all the way around the perimeter, and that was the wall. And when somebody was delivering an over-the-top service over the top of that wall, it meant that you would pay for the service outside of that wall. So it wasn't revenue generating within your ISP bill, whereas IPTV services and other services could be billed through the billing engine that the subscriber was already paying into to be connected to the ISP. That is what an OTT service is. So a good example of an OTT service is Skype. You generally connect with someone with party A's phone network to the network. But when you use it to make calls, when you use Skype to make calls, you pay Skype over the top of the wall outside of the ISP's network, off in a remote space, and that is an OTT service. So it has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with streaming video. It has to do with how you might pay for streaming video, but it has nothing to do with streaming video. And it gets even more confusing when Netflix is used as the flagship OTT, the flagship OTT service, because of course Netflix is deployed in numerous different ways. Sky's doing bundling of Netflix, as Deepa was on about at Streaming Forum, and that may well be billed through the Sky billing. That's definitely not OTT. It gets even more confusing when you look at the fact that the on-connect box that Sky might be caching might be within the old EasyNet network, which is Sky's last mile network. So actually, you're as good as getting an IPTV service and not an OTT service from Netflix in the Sky context. But of course, as soon as you move off Sky's network, then your DRM pass and so on will be
You know what this definition reminds me of, Dom? In The Princess Bride, when they're sitting there with the iocane powder, I can clearly not choose the cup in front of me. Oh, but wait, I'm not done. You can clearly, and I agree with you almost 100%. But I think things like YouTube essentially are OTT, where you're not paying for it. Well, you may be paying for your time because of the fact that you have to sit through a commercial. Right. So whether that's transactional or what have you.
I would agree that YouTube is OTT in as much as the payment for the service is not being aggregated by the last mile provider. So payment is coming from an ad provider, and basically they're paying for the content to be delivered to you as a third party. On your behalf by subbing in adverts or whatever it is. So I would agree that that YouTube could be called an OTT service because of where its paywall is, but it doesn't necessarily tie that a streaming media service is automatically an OTT service, because streaming media services could be IPTV, it could be completely free to air, at which point it gets very moot. OTT specifically talks about where a paywall is in my books.
Okay, and AOL is a good example, because actually I remember back in 2000, I had a customer engage me as their interim CTO to stream NASCAR on AOL, and it turned out it was virtually impossible to do. Sorry, they wanted to stream NASCAR, and they even had the rights to stream NASCAR. The problem was 2/3 of the fans were on AOL, which meant that we couldn't traverse that paywall to begin with. And even if we could, the data rates at which people were using AOL at that point were so much slower than the general internet, because it was still dial-up versus the early DSL. So I agree with that early definition of it. I think we're a bit muddled at this point, because I would say Netflix is OTT, but you're right, if it gets thrown in as part of a bundle, does it suddenly no longer become OTT? I think that's a. I think it's just a bit better.
I think it's better that we stop using those definitions, because we've ended up with the is OTT broadcast, and actually they shouldn't be compared in that polarized way. What's happening is broadcast is adopting more and more IP technology, and they're becoming they're merging with each other. They're not polar opposites. It's not an either.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, with the 5G, and we'll get into this a little bit later, with the EMBMS that was part of 4G that's now rolling into 5G, you've got that multicast capability to do.
And there's another word which has been misappropriated so many times. Right, listen, enough of us two.
Yeah, right, sure. Let's go on.
Let's have our guest slot. So, Tim, who have we got with us this week? Over to you.
So, Aubrey, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company, your background in the industry.
Hi, so my name is Aubrey Russell. I am the head of production at LiveX. So it's a live streaming production company, or a live production company based on the west side of Manhattan. While we do a lot of streaming and production, we also have an experiential department, and we do handle like 3D motion graphics. So we like to span the gamut on that a bit. Our biggest Our most well-known job every year is we are the webcast of Times Square New Year's Eve, and we have been for the full 10 years that it's existed. Our founder, Corey Benke, founded the webcast initially. So that's always a good time. But I am currently not in New York. I am in Des Moines, Iowa, here for work to do a live stream. Just got off a plane like an hour ago. And I am sitting in a hotel lobby looking at the snow out the window. So I'm happy to be talking to people across the pond right now.
It's much better to be sitting inside looking at the snow outside as opposed to the opposite.
Definitely. If they hadn't let me in, you'd see me outside right now. So
understand that. And as I mentioned, I think before we went on, I did one from a hotel lobby recently. If we hear any loud bangs, we'll just know that it's on your end of the.
I'll try to stay quick with the mute button. So.
All right, Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hi guys, Dan Montuschi. I am currently employed at Arqiva, which is the company which runs the DTT platform in the UK and provides satellite distribution for pretty much all of the UK's sort of traditional TV broadcasting services. And part of my role is to engage with customers about how to expand their services into OTT, sorry, Dom, type services.
How dare you?
Although they're almost certainly not OTT by Dom's very strict definition. He'll whip me at some point later. And SVOD, AVOD, TVOD, whatever might be available to a broadcaster to reach the audience that they want to reach in the UK. But I'm primarily focused on bringing broadcaster solutions in the free-to-air market, which is a fantastic thing and a good place to be. I've got a background in streaming video. I was one of the original salespeople back at a company called NarrowStep, which was perhaps one of the very earliest TV on the internet type companies, way back when, about sort of 15 years ago, before there was bandwidth to be able to do such things successfully. And then spent a number of years at Level 3, servicing broadcasters predominantly, who were looking at global IP-based solutions to distribute their content around the world and do all of that kind of thing. Back to Arqiva now, and all is well in the world of free-to-air television, and we're kind of working with people in the transition towards a different place. So very nice to be here. Good to be participating.
Yeah, cool. So thank you very much.
I'm going to cut in there, Tim, and I'm actually going to pick one of the early stories off the top of our Flipboard for Danny to actually segue into. So, what do you make of BritBox as a general thing? It's not the best scan of it on the picture there, no. But if you check the Flipboard, you can find the articles. But what do you make of BritBox, Danny?
Well, BritBox has been a long time coming. As you guys will probably know, back in the day, sort of 8-9 years ago, there was a nascent idea of a project which was entitled Project Kangaroo, which was going to be an opportunity for ITV, BBC, and Channel 4 to get together and provide their services to the public over the internet. This was something that should have happened and would have been a great thing, and I think it's now accepted that had the regulators at the time not stepped in and prevented that service from going live, that perhaps Netflix wouldn't have had the jump on the UK audience that they have had, because the regulators prevented what could have been a service as good as iPlayer is now, but commercially viable with a larger range of broadcasters involved. So that went away for a long time, and it was only really in the last 2 years that Ofcom perhaps realized its mistake. The DCMS realized the mistake. The competition regulators at the time perhaps realized their mistake and tried to start encouraging again the BBC to start talking to ITV. They have very, very different business models, obviously, One is a PSB, one is a commercial entity, but they are effectively both the PSBs that underpin the delivery of content into the UK. I'm very glad to see that they've been able to come to the table, and it looks like they're going to be able to launch a service in this year that should create a good value add. It's interesting, of course, the initial feedback from the public is, well, I already pay a license fee. Why should I be paying again for something that I've already paid for? Which I think is a rational initial reaction. But if you look a little bit deeper, and once BritBox actually comes to air, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it's going to be a quality service that has some unique capabilities that people are going to enjoy, I very much hope that it's the success that it deserves to be.
So to play a bit of devil's advocate with it, do you know, the BBC's always been a flagship of broadcast content from the UK. You know, it has an excellent commissioning and quality strategy and so on. But there is a sort of downside to that, which is with such a powerful PSB in the UK, it's very difficult to enter the market with new product, with new services independently. It causes a lot of competitive disruption, and one could say that that's going to be extenuated by BritBox.
I don't think that's the case. I think we need to look at the BBC in a different light. I think we need to look at the BBC as the bar by which other entrants need to try and reach to attain greatness in this market. We also need to accept that if the BBC hadn't been doing what it's been doing so successfully, and if the market hadn't been created so uniquely in the UK where the BBC had the opportunity to do what it does so successfully, the market itself would not be as strong as it has come to be, because people have had to strive to create content as good as the BBC. They've had to step up and make the content and the opportunities to engage with the UK population as powerful as they possibly can. Yes, the BBC has a unique advantage. They have LCN priority. They have money that comes in and supports them from the license fee, but the entire ecosystem of the UK creative arts is underpinned by the success of the BBC. And frankly, I don't think the BBC have taken that lightly. I think they know that, and I think they act fairly responsibly in the full and certain knowledge that they have this unique standing in this, you know, very unique environment.
So Dan and Dom, I've got somewhat of a dumb question, given the fact that, you know, Aubrey and I are both US based as opposed to UK based. What's the barrier to entry for a third party wanting to, you know, add a channel to BritBox as it stands? I understand what you're talking about, Dan, from the bar standpoint. You know, the BBC sets a very high bar, and journalistically and from a quality standpoint. But is the box essentially going to be like a Roku where anybody can add a channel to it, or will there be very specific things that Ofcom and others will create real or artificial barriers to entry?
As far as I'm aware, BritBox will only be the main PSB provider's content will be on there. I don't think it's a question of you know, Disney will not be able to add their content to BritBox. AMC, Fox, CBS, these guys will have their own solutions. BritBox needs to be there, and needs to be BBC content, BBC archive content, ITV archive content, and hopefully Channel 5. Which of course does bring in Viacom, which has the US influence because they are now owned by Viacom, but and then Channel 4 content. And Channel 4, obviously another PSB with US influence because they are rules. So BritBox will be the place where you can get that stuff, and it will be very interesting to see how My 5 all four, ITV Hub, and in fact iPlayer continue to have their services in a free arena, and what will go to iPlayer first before it goes to BritBox, what the difference in time scales will be. There's certainly going to be a lot of testing of the business models as BritBox comes to life. It's a very exciting time.
Okay, and then one other quick question on that. I know with iPlayer, not all expat Brits who are in the US or elsewhere can get iPlayer. There are particular places like the British military bases that it will play. But will it be, do we know whether will it be geo-blocking or geo-fencing of the BritBox if somebody physically carries it outside of the UK?
Yeah, so BritBox is currently available in the US as a paid-for service. So BritBox is available, but it is just, I believe it's only BBC content, but because I can't access it from the UK, I've never seen it as a product.
Okay.
So BritBox is a paid-for service that does have BBC archive content. They just hit, we could Google it, they just hit a milestone where they've got a number of 100,000 subscribers, and they're pretty happy with the way it's going as a paid-for service in the US. The BritBox that we're talking about now and the recent announcements have been about BritBox coming to the UK. So yes, there will be geo-blocking, geo-fencing rules around both the US BritBox that is available. I am aware that in the some of the military establishments which have been geo-whitelisted, that iPlayer is available internationally, but iPlayer effectively is paid for by the license fee that we pay for in the UK. So, you know, we get our TV, we get our radio, and we get iPlayer.
And that's where it brings up the interesting question, because is this new one is a paid-for service, essentially, you know, will people be able to carry it wherever they go? So if somebody's holidaying in Spain, you know, from the UK for 2 months, you know, can they carry that service with them? It sounds like perhaps they may be able to.
Something to chip in there. In my experience, lots of sort of Southern Spanish UK expats have always been around the streaming industry trying to get BBC One out into those expats communities. And what I discovered after many sort of requests to be brought in to do the sort of architecture for those type of systems is that the BBC One particular, you know, a particular channel like BBC One is actually a licensing deal in the UK.
Right.
You can't have BBC One outside the UK because the content is licensed for territorial distribution in the UK. So my guess is that the BritBox content is all the BBC World content, which is its commercial arm, which has all the BBC produced or commissioned content for licensing. Danny, you may know more than I do.
Now, the interesting thing about why it perhaps took so long for BritBox and the collaboration between ITV and the BBC to be completely fleshed out and to be agreed was the issue around UK TV. So UK TV is a joint venture between BBC Studios and was originally with Virgin, and then it became a joint venture with Scripps, and then through the acquisition of Scripps by Discovery, it became a joint venture with Discovery. Discovery have a very different model and the way that they want to do it, and you will see in the coming weeks that the news will surface that that split of UK TV has been ratified, and some things will go maybe Discovery's way. The Guardian published an article which I don't know, but it seems like it was pretty on the money about what's happened to UK TV, but it was actually people waiting for what would happen to UK TV as a company that needed to be ratified before the BBC could get a full ownership again of their of the older stuff in their content pool, so that they could license it correctly for BritBox.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to switch from a UK only inside baseball box score question to something much more broad. Aubrey, you'd mentioned sort of at the top of the hour something called Orbital Redox. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so it's called Orbital Redox, and it's actually a live narrative show. that airs on, one second. I've watched their first episode. My good friend Stephen Calcote, based in LA, is the director and creator of the show. And it was actually just nominated for an Emmy, which was very exciting. But it's this whole step into a live narrative context instead of like a live gaming or live music or live sports or any of those usual live theater. This combines live theater with live streaming, and it becomes completely interactive as well with the audience watching. And it's 2 actors. It's partially scripted, but they have multiple endings some episodes. And I just thought it was a very interesting foray into what live could be, and a little more gives it a little more of a box to sit inside of whenever you're streaming. But I also think that's it's so much more interesting to be throwing in graphics and things happening on the set when they're not lower thirds and they're not slates. They actually have like context to keep the story going.
Is this like a Bandersnatch but live?
Sorry?
Is this like Bandersnatch but live?
Exactly, but a little less. It is choose your own adventure, but everyone watching gets the same adventure.
Did everybody get all five endings of Bandersnatch? It took me some time.
Followed it, didn't you?
I really went for it.
Great.
So Aubrey, along the lines, you say part of it's scripted and part of it's audience, feedback. Is that given the fact that streaming has latency sort of inherent to it as well? Is the feedback through polling or chat or something that can be much faster in terms of the latency or delay?
Yeah, so the way they've only done 1 season, and the way they did this season is that they took all of the audience feedback before the show. So it was like an hour before the show, you could come in and decide some things. And then they did not tell the actors what the end result was going to be, but the actors had, like 5 options or 3 options that they would learn. And then one thing would trigger and they would know, okay, we're going to this option. But they're having to act on the fly, obviously. So it combines the talent of improvisational actors with the audience participation. But obviously, I mean, there's lots of companies who are doing really interactive things with SRT. So that helps as well. For that, we've done polling for the New York Lotto, and that's been all Facebook scraping their comments and people voting for things to happen to a snowman or anything to melt the snowman and the lotto tickets hidden inside, and everyone guesses which lotto ticket it's going to be. So, which it sees really good feedback. So, so there is that. But for this specific content, it was all taken like an hour before the show and then put in live.
And so the director knows what's going to happen in terms of the sequencing, but the actors don't know until the moment in the actual hour.
Exactly. Until I guess there's like one catalyst that hits, and that determines which fork they take in the road. But while they're doing it, so just kind of. I think it's fun for the actors.
So, Aubrey, you mentioned SRT was involved in that. So I when I'd seen Bandersnatch, I sort of worked out that a little bit of clever manifest manipulation with HLS or fragmented streaming actually makes it very easy to switch the route through a video and so on. So I'm intrigued that you mentioned SRT in there. In fact, I'm so intrigued, I'm going to press my texting. There we go. Now we're on to the technology session, but it looks very professional anyway. But yeah, so how is SRT involved in that process?
So SRT is not involved in that show. Sorry, I didn't mean to make it sound like that. But I know that like we've done polling by using SRT to be able to just have such a nice interactive feature. We also have clients who have very interactive style shows that they need the very quick response time back.
So you're using the same contribution feed that you're sending the video over as a 2-way link to get data from audiences or something, or
yeah, so we have a couple clients that are working on that. That's where it's eventually going, obviously. Right now we have something called you guys might have heard of it, the Azuro box from Azuro Group. ESPN uses it, and it's basically just some high vision Makito X's in a little box, travel box, and then we have the decoders back in our master control room, and we're able to send that out to a client, and it allows us to do remote production in our control room. They just plug the cameras in, and we can cut the show completely from us with less than 1 second latency. So we did one in Pebble Beach last year. We sent it out. We sent that with the cameras for the U.S. Amateur. We work for the USGA, the Golf Association, a couple times a year. We sent that out. They have their own video team. They plugged all of it into that box, came all back to our studio, and we had 3 techs in our studio switching the show, mastering the audio, and encoding the feed itself.
So essentially, when it comes back into your studio, it's decoded back into SDI as part of the standard switch.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, it's decoded. Yes, but it's all over the public internet, and then it comes to us, and then we take it from there. Yes.
So in many ways, that's like what was it, New Tech's talk show, I think, which what they use Skype for Business essentially.
Exactly. This just allows it to be a little more of an enterprise solution instead of a
Okay, interesting. And what's intriguing about those boxes is essentially you can add color correction, you can add a number of things for enhancement, comb filters, etc., so that the video coming out of it is much closer to what we would consider the broadcast standard as opposed to an internet standard. So okay, well that's interesting. And Dom, that makes sense, because essentially what they're doing is creating almost a video conferencing link as one of the portions of the production workflow, but it's still all going to come back to SDI just like any other camera input and be switched. I'd love to see us get to a point where we have low enough latency transport that we don't have to do that decode back to SDI, but that would mean the industry would have to agree on something that we're going to use for low latency.
Yeah, and also you're going to have compressed video more than likely. Sending uncompressed over IP would be challenging. Not impossible, but challenging. You know, NDI highlights that it's not impossible, but it's but you know, you get problems with when you're compressing. You have to move into a GOP world, and when you've got GOPs, you can't do frame accurate cuts. So it's complicated in the production.
No, that's absolutely true, and that may be where on-the-fly transcoding, true transcoding, actually comes into play, turning it back into an iframe scenario or something like that. So
yeah, or if you can afford to wait for the output, you can always cut your GOPs and transcode half GOPs or whatever way your cut positions are. But really, those are better in post. You know.
So Aubrey, from a internet live production standpoint, of course, we don't have the broadcast dump, the 8 seconds that we have to delay and like that. Are there other issues around latency besides you know, sort of the standard what Dom's describing is GOP issues where you're stuck with 2 seconds or 4 seconds or 8 seconds of delay to begin with? But what kind of issues do you face with latency across multiple, say, inputs from remote locations?
Yeah, so with that, we haven't had too much difficulty with syncing the cameras. We have had obviously difficulty whenever we take like Bond backpacks or Live View backpacks, and the camera was on each, and we have to bring all those back. Those cameras are obviously not quite on time. But for the Azura box specifically, we didn't have any latency issues because they were all coming from the same exact source. There was no wireless connection that they weren't all on together. And I think the worst individual camera, or when they're together, it's not as bad. We did most of the times when we talk about latency, we're talking about interactivity. So it's a bigger issue of our clients wanting to have some sort of interactivity. If there's not, and it's a 40-second latency because that's how much bandwidth we have and that's what's being sent right now, then that's what we're going to do. But from our control room, we usually do under 2 seconds latency just because of the equipment that we're able to store there. Whereas when you travel, if it's not a high priority, then you're going to use a product that doesn't prioritize that.
And do you find quite a few issues with venue bandwidth? Like you said, you're in Des Moines, Iowa today. I mean, is the assumption that you're going to carry something with you as a fallback because you're never sure what the venue is going to have, or the venue sort of up to snuff these days?
It's funny you asked that. While they do have Wi-Fi, and I did a speed test, it still only gave me 4 up. So we actually have a thing. I don't want to move the laptop and annoy everyone with the video change, but it's not a Pelican case. It's a Nanook case. Relatively small, and our good friend Andrew, who's the head of IT for Super Bowl halftime show for the Democratic National Convention, does a lot of large IT infrastructures. He built this Castle case, and what it does is it's a cellular bonding system, but he can tap into it, and we can as well, with a web interface. And there's 8 cards, even though only 4 can be used. So wherever you are, you can find the best cell provider in that area and only use those. So whereas, like, if you were going to bring another cellular solution, you'd have to bring 8 individual nodes and then decide which one you want to use in that moment, whereas he's got it all built in. So while they did have 4 up, I pulled out the Castle case and turned it on, and it has Wi-Fi, so I don't have to be plugged in, and I got 12 up with that. So I'm actually streaming off of cellular data right now.
When you do that, when you mentioned the 8, is it pairs? So in the old days, the systems would have 2 Sprint, 2 Verizon, 2 AT&T. Is that how it's set up as well?
Yeah, he's got 2 of each. But we did, so I'm here in Iowa. We're doing a couple like political town hall live streams for a client right now.
Figured that's why you're in Iowa this time.
So we were in Nevada last week, and these are all in people's homes. So the internet's not usually what we need. It works for them, doesn't work for us. So we will test their internet, and usually it's 1 or 2 up, which is not going to work. And so we pull out our case, and in Nevada, on the outskirts, so if you're about 30 minutes outside the Strip, there's little to no cell service.
Yeah, once you get past Henderson, there's hardly anything.
Yeah, so we had the Castle case. We had to put it outside, which normally we don't have to put it outside. We had to put it outside. Exactly, hire someone to hold it. No, and we were still only able to get 6 at max. So what we did was we actually streamed to core, and then we had someone in our control room back in New York pull it down from core and then stream out to the 3 platforms, because we only had enough bandwidth to really support just sending it out and not being able to push it from our own location.
Dom has a story about that involving a hotel and a van and somebody having to stay with the equipment, right, Dom? You want to tell us about an early streaming media Europe?
Oh, there's just too many dark stories about trying to maintain links. But
put it this way, Aubrey, it turns out that the Streaming Media Europe show, we didn't have enough bandwidth into the basement of this particular hotel to be able to do any streaming demonstrations. And so to the rescue, one of Dom's friends, who's also named Tim, drives a little truck up from Brighton that has a satellite dish on it and proceeds to put it out in the car park, hook it up, and then run a physical wire into the basement of this hotel.
Bless him. He loves calling through ducts, especially during conferences. So Danny's smiling because he knows him. Listen, talking to Danny, I've got a question. Danny, so we talked a little bit about tech there, which is always good because I like having tech on SMAF. But just sort of with your more commercial hat on, in the streaming space specifically, the last 12 months has been a lot of conversation about low latency for and improved latency, and the other obviously perennial topic of codecs is floating around. In the top end of the industry, certainly in the DTT space, are there any changes happening with codecs and with your transport models to improve capabilities like latency and so on? Are any of these streaming the innovations in the streaming space percolating back up to what we might normally term the traditional broadcast space?
On the streaming side, no, I don't think so. It's very much an HLS game, and in fact, strangely, the most successful and the most relevant streaming service on the free-to-air platform, the service that connects to the most devices, TVs, and gives the kind of legacy sets a chance to still connect to them, is something that you know quite a lot about, which is it's a progressive download system run off ideas encoders. And
fair disclosure, I've done some business. I've gone red now. You've embarrassed me.
I've embarrassed you, but it's interesting, right? So there's a connected TV service which runs off an MHEG, M-H-E-G, old tech trigger within the broadcast chain, runs off a carousel in the traditional broadcast chain that brings up a red button. And the solution that Arkiva put together was able to inquire as to the capabilities of the device that it was going to serve a stream to. And by doing that and knowing whether it was a 2011 Samsung or a 2012 Panasonic or a 2013 LG, for instance, all of which have some vagaries in the way that they will accept an incoming stream, meant that the particular encoding solution that was acquired from Ideas was able to serve a stream specifically for that service. Now that's great for those legacy devices, but increasingly as we move into a kind of a new world and look at devices going forwards, they're very much looking at HBBTV 1.1 and onwards, with a sort of anticipation of HBBTV2 devices, which are predominantly HTML5 presentation layers with an HLS / dash, probably HLS underlying streaming architecture. These things are great, but currently, if you're looking at adoption and resilience in the TV world, still services like the Red Button Connect service are going to be needed for quite some time. I think it's also interesting thinking about the on the codec side of where the free-to-air TV world is at the moment, because we're still delivering services that the most successful services, including all the PSB channels delivering TV, are still delivering in MPEG-2, right? They're delivering DVB-T, MPEG-2 services, and there's thinking about whether that should be moving to DVB-2, MPEG-4 services, but these are all things that are going to need government intervention effectively, because the free-to-air world has a lot of legacy attached to it, and unless you can solve the legacy issues and about how people like the BBC are going to continue to be able to deliver to 98.5% of the population, you need to service the whole population.
So you won't be seeing BBC One in AV1 anytime soon, then?
I don't think so.
And laughed there. I saw that.
You had that in there, Tom, didn't you?
72 times, wasn't it? Or something. 1 minute and 53 seconds to encode a frame at the moment. I think that's just dropped, actually, to be fair to the AV1 team. I know they're working hard on it, but yeah. I did work out that 1 minute and 53 seconds, I think you could probably hand draw every frame in that time.
So Dan, you mentioned HBB TV, and of course we've got ATSC 3.0 coming into play here in the US in late 2019, early 2020, and we've got EMBMS, which we sort of referred to at the top of the hour. To me, these are the technologies that the broadcast world has learned from streaming, and is sort of taking a page from our playbook and actually turning around and answering with something that seems relatively elegant. The limitation, it seems, though, especially with multicast, is we are back to that limitation of maybe a finite number of channels in a multicast scenario. Is there anything, and I'll throw it out to everybody on on here, is there anything that we see that allows us to do multicast but still scale the number of channels out to the 500 channel, 1,000 channel universe, as opposed to being stuck back at, say, the top 5 channels?
Wired connections? What about wired connections?
Yeah, sure, fair enough. I mean, assuming that we're using a decent enough compression to be able to run all those channels simultaneously. But we live in a mobile world at this point, so that's my fear, is we'll get to multicast finally after 20 years, and it'll pull us back to 10 channels of multicast as opposed to thousands of channels of unicast like you see in a Roku box or something like that.
Well, I think you need to consider the efficiency bug, right? It's the efficiency bug. At the moment, the most efficient way to deliver broadcast services is from a tower stuck in the air, delivering an MPEG-2 service out to everybody's TVs. Unfortunately, those can't be picked up on mobile devices unless you're going to clunk in an MPEG-2 or an MPEG-4 receiver, which has been tried. It didn't really work. Reception on the move was very clunky. It was tried about 12 years ago. It doesn't work. But as you move towards the FEMBMS model and 5G, then yes, I mean, tests are ongoing at the moment. I think there's a very interesting test happening at the moment with Road Schwartz happening out in Bavaria, where they have enabled one of their DTT transmitters to deliver FEMBMS signals, and it's delivering over mountains and pastures and cities and small towns, and they're going around and they're testing that with early devices. None of these devices are in the market at the moment, but they're testing the delivery of effectively multicast broadcast television services in a kind of multiplexed way through these mobile devices. Of course, while that's happening, and Roden Schwartz are very happy to be taking part in it, the mobile phone operators locally are all going, oh, well, we're not going to allow SIM-free access to FEMBMS services without trying to bundle it. So there's going to be a bun fight. You know, the technology seems to be there with 5G and 5G broadcast to be able to deliver effectively a DTT replacement service over FEMBMS. It's very interesting that the only active organization that are trialing this at the moment are the local Bavarian television organization, who are unique, if not in Europe, globally, because they own the transmitter, they own the TV station, they produce their content, and they own the network running into it. They've got the entire value chain. So it makes sense for them to try and discover and test new ways of delivering broadcast television to all devices, including mobile devices. And it could be a 5G dongle plugged into a SCART plug into a terribly old television. They're testing it. But the people who have really got the skin in the game are the MNOs who want to be able to monetize this. And if they're going to re-engineer their entire networks to be 5G capable, they're going to maybe want to be doing deals directly with broadcasters. So it's a whole new paradigm shift in the way that carriage fees could end up being negotiated, rather than with a network services operator like Arqiva or like some of the German operators. How are they going to actually how are they going to monetize it? The flow of money, of course, always instructs the way things pan out.
I think you make a good point, Danny. I think we are getting. It feels to me like we're getting to a bit of a critical point. One of the reasons why I think this last 18 months or so on has been so heavily profiling cord cutting and so on, is I think we're getting to a bit of a tipping point in the industry where most of the core technical challenges have been solved, and we're really into a world where it's about rights deals. I don't know if Aubrey, maybe you'd have a different point, because obviously you're not necessarily doing content that might have been in the traditional vein of television per se. So maybe there's new arms and branches of content emerging on the sides.
Yeah, well, I think streaming's been competing with fighting against its second screen name. I think a lot of times when everyone started, or a lot of the networks started live streaming, the whole point of doing that on a social channel or on live stream at the beginning or any of those, it was to create a second screen for the ultimate fan. And now it's how do we leverage streaming for what it is and what it can do that's not television? How do we avoid putting television on the internet? Because that's what it is now, especially with Netflix and all of these things. And it's going to go into live eventually, especially with ATSC3. So yeah, I mean, as far as I'm not unfortunately into the legal, figuring out rights and all of those things, because most of the streaming right now is done on social platforms. So rights involve music rights and corporate logo rights. So, and there's no really way to break into those on the social platforms. You just can't use them, because even extremely white label channels will still get taken down for playing the wrong song. Because it's just done by a bot. It's not done by a person. So until there's that level of maturity within the streaming platforms, and also allowing oversight for it more, I think too, just allowing humans to have a little more touch on it, or making the bots smarter, whichever they want to do.
Well, and I think it's interesting what you're mentioning, Dan, and the fact that you've got a test bed there in Bavaria that fits all the criteria, because that actually is really nice for the rest of us to see if it works in a walled garden, so to speak. Dom, we could do OTT, with Netflix later, but if it works in that particular walled garden, then what it allows us to do is say, okay, now let's move to a conversation around those who own the backhaul pipes versus those who own the towers versus those who have the virtual mobile network platforms. In the States, it seems like with 5G, at least what I heard at Mobile World Congress, is A, it's going to be delayed in rolling out. B, even when it is rolled out, it's only going to be rolled out in limited cities. And C, it's possible that the data rates themselves are actually going to be slower than 4G in some instances. So it feels like we've got a really good marketing engine going for something that isn't going to be available for quite some time.
The crazy thing about the mobile operators is that they have been given this, complete freedom to operate, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G all together and next to each other, without having to fully upgrade or ever turn off any of those legacy services. So, you compare that, clearly clearly the people that are fighting for the investment are better than the DTT world, because to be able to do that without having actually fully upgraded your previous technology and turned it off, and then freed that spectrum for the rest of the world to have a go at the next thing that's available to them, seems like a pretty unfair place to be. But
well, and unlike in the UK, where if a claim is made, you've got a government entity that will step in and test that claim. Here, we've actually got the problem that AT&T, for instance, is doing something called 5G enhanced, where people's phones now say 5GE, which is actually just the 4G network that they've decided to call 4.5G or 5th generation enhanced. And so it is, I've got friends who are like, hey, I got 5G on my phone. I'm like, no, it's impossible.
No, you don't,
dude. But they're like, but my phone says 5GE. And I'm like, yeah, that isn't 5G.
I'm reminded of Adobe's HD tag on 420p. Do you remember? 20
Visually was true. It was higher definition, not high definition. So, all right. So we got just a couple minutes here. Let's talk about trends. Aubrey, from a live production standpoint, after Dom does this thing, from a live what are the trends that you see in live production over the next couple months as we go up to the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it earlier, and I feel like it's a broken record for most people in live at this point, but interactivity is still really big. Being able to have live polling, live interaction with the audience, live one-to-one, major platform, anything like that. It's still a major player because it's engaging to the audience, and the best way to keep an audience is to engage them. So it's not necessarily about that they want to take the stats from the polling. It's that they want the viewer's eyes, which is all we're all going for anyways.
And yeah, I have a silly question. Is Flash Player actually dead for delivery on the client side?
No.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think so, but no, Dom, you've wanted it dead for years, but ultimately for you,
you can't kill it yet.
Right. Okay.
It can't die. They haven't replaced it, so you can't kill it.
All right. Any other
No,
trends?
yeah. So that's interactivity, and then it's like I just said, not putting television on the internet. Like clients are coming to us with very new ideas, and letting us kind of engineer them and figure out how it's actually going to come to fruition. But yeah, I think using the internet for what it can be and not what people just accept that it is.
Good. Dan, trends from your standpoint for the next, say, 9 months.
Trends from my standpoint is pay light. So, it's a very different world in the UK compared to the US in terms of cord cutting. The cord cutting phenomenon has not really hit the UK, or has only just started to really encroach into the UK. And I think, and you can check this out if you have access to the Flipboard. We've got some really interesting insight from Dr. Farida Hosseini, who's just done some modeling on the free-to-air model, and how it would seem that the share of commercial impact seems very stable and, in fact, increasing in the hard-to-reach 16 to 35 and 35 to 44 age groups, the people who've got the money and who are spending the money. They are increasingly looking to maintain a free-to-air television service with pay-light options. Now, those pay-light options are going to be increased with BritBox, and I'm also interested to see the way that Sky are looking forward towards a satellite-free future with the launch of Sky X this week in. You've got a nasty cough there, Tim, but you're on mute, so that's all.
I got that in the UK. Something to do with one of Dom's cats, I think.
Oh, right. And so I think Sky's move towards a future to be able to deliver a wholesale service in the pay world, free of satellite, is very interesting. People like SES Astra must be shaking their boots while Sky launched Sky X out in Austria. It'll be very interesting to see how Sky X goes in take-up in the Austrian market, because surely they're going to roll out the kind of full Sky package, all delivered over IP. Whether that's going to clog up the local exchanges in a unicast world waits to be seen. And of course, if London Bridge falls, which we all know the term for that, and it's all delivered over IP, there's only going to be one cohort of viewers that are able to watch that without interruption, and that's over the free-to-air network, over DTT. So yeah, those are the things that are coming up for me.
All right, and Dom, before I ask you trends, I want to throw out to you and our guests this topic that just came up today, where HBO's new president is saying Netflix isn't a brand. Just quickly, Aubrey, do you think Netflix is a brand, or is it just a place to store content?
I definitely think it's a brand. I think the amount of content that they have produced themselves makes them a brand, and you know what you're getting whenever you click on what style, how it's going to be shot. The direction is very similar across all of them, whether it's a TV show or a movie. So I definitely think Netflix is a brand.
So when you hear that dun dun, you don't think Law and Order, you think Netflix now, right?
No, because that's Law and Order's content. But there's like this is a terrible argument, but Walmart has great value, but Walmart also carries other products. But when you see great value, that doesn't mean that Walmart's not a brand just because it carries other products. That's kind of.
I think all I can say on that one is my daughter is a proud owner of a Netflix T-shirt, which one of the staff gave to her when she came to visit.
Where did we get that?
You have to be best mates with their director of hardware implementation, but but she wears that T-shirt very proudly all the time, and I bet she's never even heard of HBO. So yeah, Netflix is definitely a brand in our household. So
all right, Danny, you get the last word here.
Well, I'm really interested. Actually, you mentioned the Netflix, which is like an audio trademark, and it's absolutely awesome. But recently, and I think this speaks to the podcast revolution. So I had dinner with my stepfather recently. He's in his 70s, very active, still working, politically connected and everything. And he said, yeah, well, what I'm really enjoying listening to at the moment is the Brexit cast, which is the BBC's podcast with the senior political correspondents talking about Brexit. Now, I'm really sorry that I've mentioned Brexit. I'm not going to mention Brexit again. We're not here to talk about it. We're not here to talk about that. But it's got me engaged quite heavily with the BBC's new audio app, which is for streaming and for their podcasts and for all of their on-demand audio services, and it's called BBC Sounds. And the BBC Sounds audio trademark is even better than Netflix, and I'm going to try and record it, and I'm going to send it to you. It's just a tiny little thing, but it's very good, and I would like to say well done.
We've got a way to go.
And in the States, what I was referring to with Aubrey is Law and Order, which has been on for 20 some odd years, has a very distinctive 2-beat sound as well, that when you hear it, to me, that had been the definitive one. And then when Netflix came out with theirs, it's close, but it's enough different that you know that when you hear that, you're hearing something that Netflix produced. So
surely the king of them all, though, is the Intel Inside one.
That's true. Or Jaws.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, stop humming. We're almost on the hour. In fact, we've just gone over, but we started a minute late.
All right.
So
all of these on the Thursday night show tonight, so that
I am DJing at 12 o'clock if you want some jungle mixed up with requests, but there's a very acquired taste.
Take us out here, Don.
But listen, Danny, brilliant to have you on. I will catch up with you soon.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cool. And Aubrey, I hope your event this afternoon goes amazingly well. If you let us know the link and it's a public link, then do, and we'll share it out on the well, as long as it's not political, we'll share it out on the SMAF feeds. If it's political, then we probably will remain impartial and not do such things.
It's definitely political, but thank you.
Maybe it's a good political thing, but let's not get involved with that right now. Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us all. And Tim, safe travels. Hope you get over the cold. Just for once, I'm not seeing you at a conference in the next few weeks, but
are you going to be at NAB in?
No, I won't be at NAB. It's too many stakes and too far to travel for.
Well, I guess we've got SMAF coming up just before that, so we can give a sort of run up to NAB before that show. So
you'll be my eyes on the ground as always for that one. That's great, excellent. And to our great audience and obviously our guests once again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to see if I can press the right buttons. And take us out of here. We'll see you next month. Thanks very much.